And I think we can go ahead and start with our webinar for today. Thanks everyone for joining today. We are really excited to have you in this the next 1 hour webinar under our community development activity that brought to you by Form. And today's session, we will be talking about navigating open science implementation, strategic pathways, and lessons learned across Europe. I will go through like a few slides about the housekeeping. So next slide, please. So I think by now everyone is kind of aware of the new features at Zoom, where you can just move in the different windows. If you have any technical issues, please put it in the chat. For any questions related to the content, please put it in the Q&A area. And if we are talking too fast, please don't be hesitant to raise your hand and let us know. Just like a quick introduction to those who are joining us for the first time. The Forum for Open Access in MENA is a nonprofit organization that has been established in 2022, and we are trying to support the advancement of open science policies and practices in research communities and institutions across the Arab region overall. We are trying to support the advancement of open science ecosystem in the Arab region, creating more accessibility resources and localized resources. This is one of the key goals for Form is to localize the overall experience of the open science and make it more appealing for the Arab region, encourage the collaborative community partnerships. And this is one example. Thanks for all for joining us today. Next slide, please. Our vision, like we are working towards unlocking research for and in the Arab region and working towards more open world. Our mission is to support the advancement of open science practice in research communities and research institutions across the Arab region by facilitating the exchange of actionable insights and development of practical policies. With your support and our network support, actually research, we are aiming like to have the researchers, librarians, professors, policymakers, open science advocates, and university leaders in our community. And as of today, we are really proud to have around 31 members within our community, a kind of institutional member. In addition to our existing 7,000 individuals who are supporting these activities and actively participating in the events and the activities we are having. These are coming from 211 institutions from 110 countries all over the world. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce our distinguished speaker for today, Dr. Andrea Curley. And in the next 1 hour webinar, we will be hearing from him how the universities in Europe and the UK in general, they are transforming the open science to actions. And not only that, how they adapted the open access policies and practices to fit within the institutional unique environment, constraints, and the strategic goals. I will leave the floor to you, Andrea, and all the best.
Thank you very much, Rangwa. So let me just share my screen now. Right, there we go. So you should be able to see my screen at this point. So yeah, as you know, my name is Andrea, and today I'll be talking about navigating open science implementation, drawing on strategies and lessons learned across Europe, as well as a few examples from further afield. Before we dive in, just a quick word about who I am and where I'm coming from. I'm an associate director at Research Consulting. We are a boutique consultancy based in the UK, and we specialize in the research and scholarly communication sector. My own work personally cuts across open research, research data management, research integrity, research assessment, and scholarly communication more broadly, so squarely into the territory that we will be considering today. I also chair the Strategy Advisory Task Force within the Dryad repository, as well as sitting on their board of directors. Originally, I am an engineer by training, which I mention only because it perhaps explains my preference for frameworks and structured ways of thinking, and you'll see plenty of those today. A note on what to expect from the presentation. So this isn't a session about telling you what your institution should do. The session is about giving you a vocabulary and a set of patterns for thinking about what you're already doing and what your future options might be. So here is where we'll be going. I'll start with a brief introduction, framing what we mean by open research and why institutions are invested in it. Then we'll spend the bulk of our time on institutional delivery models, so the different ways in which universities are actually organizing themselves to support open research. And I'll bring those to life with some examples from real institutions. And I'll then zoom out to the broader policy and grassroots efforts that surround work being done in institutions. And I'll leave you with a few final reflections. And there will be, of course, a bit of time for questions at the end. So do use the Q&A functionality in Zoom if you have any questions. So let's start with the basics. So I want to share a quick word on terminology because this matters a lot more than is sometimes acknowledged. You'll hear several terms used almost interchangeably in the space, but they actually have pretty different scopes. So at the narrowest end, so here at the top of this chart, we've got open access. So open access is specifically about publications, making them openly available with open licenses, but that's it. It doesn't say anything about data, code, or anything else. Then we have open science, which is probably the most common term internationally, and it refers to transparent research practices that extend beyond publications to data, code, and other research objects. And the thing to flag here is that open science carries a STEM connotation, so it tends to land less well in the humanities and parts of the social sciences, where the word science can feel a bit exclusionary. And that is why open research is increasingly the preferred term in policy circles. It's deliberately more inclusive. It recognizes that openness looks quite different in the humanities, in the social sciences, and in STEM, and that all of those traditions have something to contribute to the openness conversation. And finally, we have the broadest term here, which is open scholarship. This goes beyond research to encompass teaching, public engagement, and the broader conception of knowledge as a public good. So today, I will mainly use open research as the chosen term, partly because it's a term I'm most comfortable with, and partly because it best captures what most institutions are actually trying to do, regardless of the language that they're using. But do forgive me if I go back and forth between that and open science by mistake. So, why are institutions doing this in the first place? Why are they engaging with open research? It's worth being explicit in my view, because open research isn't a single intervention with a single benefit. And for institutions, it pays back across 5 dimensions that I think are closely interconnected. The first one is quality. So the fact that open practices are associated with enhanced rigor and higher levels of research integrity. So essentially the fact that when data and methods are open, errors can get caught faster and reproducibility is enabled. The second point we have here is reach. So the fact that open outputs get more visibility, more citation, and there's more potential for societal impact. So they have the potential to travel further. The third point here is reputation. So the fact that open research can be a position in play as much as a values one for institution. So it can help institutions in attracting talent and building collaborative networks. The fourth theme we have here is values. So the fact that openness is a way for institutions to demonstrate a genuine commitment to equity and transparency, and increasingly demonstrate to prospective students and staff that this is something that matters to them. And this is something that we are seeing more people care about over time. And fifth, and this is perhaps the most familiar driver, we have compliance. So funder mandates and policy mandates are naturally pushing institutions in this direction, whether they like it or not. So if a funder or a policy, national policy requires openness, institutions will simply have to do it, or they'll be in trouble, usually in terms of funding. So the reason I'm flagging all of these 5 reasons is that institutions tend to lead with one or two of these in their internal narrative, and that choice tends to shape how their open research function is resourced and also where it sits within the institution, which is something we will look at in the next section. So a compliance-led institution will look very different from one that is led from a values perspective, even if on paper they might look like they're doing similar things. So, right, that is the framing. So let's now get into the heart of today's session. So how institutions are actually delivering on this. So when you look across institutions, what becomes clear is that they're starting from very different places. And there are 3 variables in particular that, in my experience, set the starting point for an institution when it wants to begin activities around open research. So the first aspect is the type of institution. So a research-intensive university, a technical university, or a university of applied sciences, they have fundamentally different research profiles, different mixes of disciplines, and as a result, different things that open research can practically mean in their local context. Or even in a more extreme case, a conservatoire teaching music and a large multi-faculty research university, they're simply not solving the same problem when it comes to open research implementation. The second aspect we've got here is the policy context. So the fact that national open research commitment, funding programs, and shared infrastructures will naturally shape what institutions prioritize. So an institution that operates in a country with a strong national open science strategy, with dedicated funding, has very different options from an institution in a country where the policy environment is silent, so not saying anything in particular about open research, or fragmented, so having different actors in the landscape saying different things. And the third aspect I want to mention here in terms of setting your starting point is what I call the anchoring legacy. So the idea here is that the open research function will have to sit somewhere in the institution. So it will have to be based somewhere. This could be the library, the research office, IT services, or distributed across all 3. But the main point being that this is shaped by past decisions about funding, about structures, about leadership. So the history of the institution will determine where the open research function typically sits. It is possible in principle to move it, but it's rarely easy. So the reason I'm flagging these aspects is they're largely given. You don't really get to choose from day one what kind of institution you are, or what country you're in. You're just there. So when we look at the next set of variables, the ones that you can shape, bear in mind that these starting conditions that different institutions are dealing with or under can vary a lot. And so institutions in different countries and contexts will face very different environments locally and nationally. Now, here are the 3 dimensions where institutions actually have agency. So meaning where you can shape things more directly. So the first one I want to highlight is the scale of the function. So how big the open research team is and how it's distributed. This can range from a single fractional role tucked into the library, all the way through to a program office with embedded faculty support across the institution. So there's a huge variation possible. The second aspect is integration within the institution. And this is the one that, in my experience, is most often underestimated. By integration here, I mean how deeply is open research woven into strategy, governance, and reward systems, rather than sitting as a service on the side. So an institution with only 3 open research staff who sit on key strategic committees can be potentially more integrated than an institution with 30 staff who are essentially just running a help desk. So that integration aspect can make a huge difference. And the third aspect I want to highlight is the scope of activity around open research. This is particularly referring to how broadly openness is defined, and importantly, the gap between what an institution claims to do strategically, so in the fancy documents put on the website, and what it actually delivers operationally. For example, many institutions have ambitious open research statements, but those aren't actually reflected in what their teams deliver day to day. So these three dimensions, scale, integration, and scope, are what we're going to use as the lens to go through the rest of this section. And I want to say something about why this is harder than it looks. So if you think about these three dimensions as the axis of a Rubik's Cube, you can quickly see the challenge. Moving on one axis often has effects on the others. So scaling up a team without integrating them strategically tends to produce a service that is quite busy, but not visible within the institution. Or pushing for strategic integration without enough scale produces a case where you have leaders without a delivery engine. Or broadening the scope without the resources to back it up will create strategy documents that outpace reality. So the point of this framework I'm about to walk you through isn't to solve the puzzle for you, so to say, but it's to help you see which face of the cube you're working on at the moment and what you could do next. So let's start looking at some examples. So in the bottom left corner, we have foundational open research provision. So in this kind of framework, what we're talking about is micro teams or solo practitioners, so individuals, a narrow scope and minimal integration. And this is where many institutions actually start with delivering open research. In the bottom right, we have what I call the strategically integrated open research function. So this is a small team with broad scope and high integration, despite limited capacity, so just having a small number of people. In the top left, we have a network of open research services sort of approach. So this would be a large team with strategic and operational remits, but not deeply integrated into governance and reward. And in the top right, the most resource-intensive configuration is an embedded open research function. So this would be a large team with a broad scope and highly integrated both strategically and operationally. So I appreciate I've just shared a ton of information with you. So this is just to introduce these approaches. So I'll take one of each of these in turn because they have very different strengths and trade-offs. So let's start with the foundational open research provision model. So it looks like this in practice. You tend to have one person, sometimes a fraction of one person, who has open research as part of a wider portfolio of responsibilities. Often this tends to be a librarian, but sometimes it could be somebody in the research office. Their work is very real, but quite narrow because of necessity. So it tends to be focused on running the repositories, answering open access questions, helping researchers navigate the basic aspects of research data management or research data sharing. And this type of role sits inside existing structures. So it is not a function in its own right. So it's not an open research office. It can be tempting to view this type of approach dismissively. So as, this is not properly doing open research. And I want to push back on that because for a lot of institutions, this is genuinely the right answer, the right fit, because this is cheap, it's close to researchers, and if your country has some shared infrastructure that the institution can plug into, you don't need to replicate infrastructure in-house. So the barrier to starting to deliver open research is quite low, precisely because nothing has to be restructured or created from scratch. What tends to threaten this type of model is turnover. So if you have one person and that one person leaves, then the function effectively can disappear overnight. And the institutional memory, so the way things work, knowing the way things work, goes with the person who has just left. The other thing to watch for here is drift. So the fact that there isn't a strategic foothold means that this kind of provision can quietly stop matching what the institution actually needs. And nobody really notices because there's nobody senior enough in the conversation to flag it. It's just this one person or fraction of one person delivering on the work. I want to give you a concrete example of this. So this type of approach is typical of smaller specialist institutions or institutions that are just starting to develop their open research function, as I was saying. And in the UK, Guild HE member are a good illustration. So these are predominantly small and vocationally focused institutions. And it feels like creative arts, agriculture, healthcare, or the built environment. And for institutions of this size and profile, a larger or fully embedded function would be massively over-engineered. They just don't need it. So foundational provision tends to be exactly right for them, including as a long-term approach. So this isn't a step in their development, in their evolution, it's just what they need. So the lesson here to keep in mind is that this foundational model isn't a failure mode, and it doesn't mean to be left behind. And for many institutions, this is indeed the rational and fit for purpose configuration. Now, let's move on to the strategically integrated open research function. So this is the configuration that I find most genuinely interesting personally, partly because it's counterintuitive. So you wouldn't necessarily look at the head count, so the number of people working on open research, and think this institution is doing really well on open research. There might only be 3 or 4 people. But if you scratch the surface, and you'll find them sitting on the right committees, shaping HR policy, on research assessment, talking directly to senior leaders. So in these cases, the trick that the open research function has pulled is being selective. So they have worked out what's worth doing in-house, usually the strategic policy shaping and integrating with other functions sort of stuff, and what's worth plugging into externally. So they leverage national repositories, shared training resources, sector-wide infrastructure. So you end up with a small team that punches above its weight and genuinely influences how the institution runs. The risk, a bit similarly to the previous one, is that this kind of model depends on the people because it's just small. So it really relies on the people involved. So when the right people are in the right roles, it works beautifully. But when they leave or when one of them leaves, integration can unravel surprisingly quickly because it was carried by individuals. So it wasn't institutionalized. And it's also hard to imagine this configuration working effectively in a country where the surrounding ecosystem is weak because since the institution doesn't have many resources or a big headcount working on open research, they do need something external that they can plug into. Fortunately, today there are lots of international resources as well. So in terms of training, for example, there's a lot that everybody can access. But in terms of digital infrastructure, that does tend to be delivered at the national level. Now, picture a larger university, so 8 or 10 faculties, widely different research cultures from philosophy to mechanical engineering. In that case, you would have a single, well, you often have a single central team that is trying to serve all of those. But it's hard to achieve. And so many institutions who have tried that, so who have tried to serve different faculties only from the center, they've realized that what they needed was what is called the hub and spoke arrangement. Imagine like the wheels of a bicycle. So you have the central hub and all the spokes around them. So you have a central open research team that holds the specialist expertise. And then you have embedded data stewards or open research fellows that sit out in the faculties or departments, however the institution is organized. So in this model, you have the ability to answer frontline questions locally, so directly in the faculties or departments, and only the harder questions get escalated centrally. And when this type of model works, it's genuinely impressive because researchers get advice that fits the discipline. The central team isn't drowning in basic queries, and there's resilience built into the system because no single person's departure is going to break everything in the system. The catch here is the cost of coordination, which is substantial and often invisible from the outside. And consistency can also vary because the embedded part of the model, so people in the different faculties or department, depends on them choosing to resource their own data stewards or fellows. And some faculties tend to do better than others, and this is partly related with disciplinary customs and habits. On top of that, because this configuration is tends to be operationally very busy, it's quite common for it to stay at the service level indefinitely. So instead of integrating very much, the teams are doing a lot of useful work, but the governance and reward systems remain untouched. So there's a lot of activity around open research, but the deeper culture change that's needed never quite happens. So if your institution is there, that's the main thing to watch for. I want to pause briefly on this configuration because it's worth understanding as a phase rather than an end state. Because what's happening in many institutions in this category is that they've invested substantially in open research as an operational service, sometimes very impressively, but they have recognized that it hasn't yet been woven into how careers are evaluated and how the institution is run. So it's a common phase, and this is often a transitional one. And it's the one that's most likely to feel like we've done a lot around open research, but the messages are not landing. Nothing really is changing. And a practical next step here, and this is something I genuinely encourage you to consider, is to link your open research commitments to existing institutional commitments to research assessment reform. So if your institution is a DORA signatory or a CORARA signatory, you can use those commitments as a lever for governance integration. Because the two agendas, open research and changing evaluation and reward mechanism, are deeply connected, and often they're being worked on by different teams in the institution that don't talk to each other enough, so that there's often opportunity for synergies there. And finally, we have the embedded model. So this is what you get when an institution decides that open research is going to be a proper function, not just a service. There's a dedicated team, often library-led, but with formal collaboration with IT, the research office, legal and ethics functions. And this type of open research function often runs the repository, potentially a data registry or catalog, a range of internal training programs. Some of the services delivered by institutions doing this, following this type of model, can even grow into national or regional hubs over time, and they can even host infrastructure that other institutions then rely on. What you get for that level of investment, because it's a lot, is visibility and professionalized expertise. Researchers know who to ask. The institutions have actual capacity for policy advice, for RDM support at scale, so research data management, I mean, and for the kind of synergies that you need between library and other scholarly communication activities that smaller setups simply can't manage. The trade-off here naturally is cost. This is expensive. It's not a cheap configuration to maintain, particularly if there is digital infrastructure delivered in-house that has to be sustained year after year. And the interdepartmental relationship, so between, say, library, IT, research office, legal and ethics, Those don't run themselves. They need active stewardship and maintenance, and that's an ongoing time cost on top of the headcount. Usually it's committees and subcommittees that take quite a lot of time. So if your institution gets to this configuration but underestimates the maintenance burden required, you can find yourself in trouble quite quickly. An example I've picked for this is TU Delft. They're one of the genuine pioneers of open research support in Europe, and their function covers strategy, operation, and culture. It's a whole spectrum. And what I think is striking about TU Delft is how they've articulated their own conception of open science, which you can see in the diagram here on the right. You can see equity, integrity, collaboration, impact as four interlinking dimensions. And this kind of conceptual clarity and the willingness to publish it is itself an artifact of the embedded function. It signals that open research is a strategic commitment. It's not just a service. Now, and these are very important slide in this section. These are configurations, not stages. I want to be very clear about this because there's a temptation to read the frameworks I've just talked through as a maturity model where foundational means beginner and embedded means advanced. That's wrong and an unhelpful way of thinking about it. Some institutions will grow scale before integration. Some will grow integration before scale. Some deliberately stay small. So the framework doesn't prescribe a direction. It's just a way of describing where you are and what your trade-offs are. So let's step slightly out of the framework now. I want to share some patterns that have been observed across over 20 institutions in the UK about what actually enables success in delivering open research. There are three enablers that stand out consistently. The first one is collaborating across functions. So, as I was saying earlier, open research lives in the intersection of the library, research office, IT, legal, ethics, and increasingly HR as well. If these professional services aren't talking to each other, then widespread engagement with open research practices in the institution is simply not going to happen. The second factor here is evidencing benefits. So it's especially important to make a credible case for open research to senior leaders, and benchmarking against peer organization is one of the most effective ways of doing that, because senior leaders tend to respond to comparative data. So what are similar organizations to us doing at the moment? And increasingly to reputational risk if they feel like you are falling behind your peers. And the third point here is building communities. So seeking collective input into policy and process development rather than just handing down policies from the top down in the institution. This makes a real difference to adoption. And researchers are far more likely to engage with policies that they help shape. And an idea that is often cited, especially in a UK context, is that of co-creating policies with local stakeholders. At the same time, three barriers come up repeatedly, so I'll briefly talk you through those as well. The first barrier is meeting funder mandates. This might sound counterintuitive because funder mandates are also a driver, but mandates create a compliance-focused culture, and compliance is the lowest bar that you can set for open research. So if your researchers are doing the minimum to satisfy funder requirement, it's less likely that they'll be following best practices. The challenge is to use mandates as a floor, not as a ceiling. The second challenge is serving multiple disciplines. So different disciplines need genuinely different messaging and support. And what works for a biomedical scientist doesn't work for a historian. And pretending otherwise produces support that nobody is going to find useful. But doing this well is resource intensive. It's basically expensive and needs more people. And the third is managing intellectual property. There is a perception, sometimes well-founded, but sometimes not, that open research practices are in conflict with the idea of commercialization or patents. But in reality, an extent of openness is usually possible even when intellectual property is involved, but it requires some slightly more nuanced advice from professional services, and that capacity is often not there because it is genuinely complex. So let me bring this to life with a few more examples of institutions that sit in different parts of the framework. So the first one is the University of Groningen. And Groningen is a good illustration of an institution that's toward the embedded end of the spectrum. So they cover the full spectrum of open scholarship, and you can see links on these slides at the bottom. You can also follow. They cover open access, open data, open education, public engagement, and they also have an institutional open science community. And that last one is interesting because it signals that openness is being pursued as a community, not as a compliance initiative. They also have open science and fair data in the institutional strategic plan for 2021 to 2026. So it's woven into the top level institutional strategy rather than sitting as a separate side initiative. So the thing here to notice is the breadth and the integration. So this isn't a library service that happens to do open research. It's an institutional commitment with multiple front doors. Durham University in the UK is another useful example. This is a mid-sized research-intensive university in the UK, and the open research function is delivered primarily through their library. So what's interesting here is that open research and open data don't appear in the higher level university strategy for 2017 to 2027. And the institution does have an open research offer, repository, thesis, OA funding, REF compliance, or REF is a research excellence framework. It's about funding and impact in the UK. But the function sits more at the operational level rather than the strategic level. And as I was saying earlier, this isn't a criticism at all. It's a clear example of a configuration where the function is there, but the institutional integration is lighter. The point is, don't assume that an institution without open research in its top-level strategy is doing worse than others. It may simply have made a choice about where to put its strategic attention, and that's very legitimate. And I should also add here that this is the perception from the outside. So I naturally don't work at any of these institutions. So this is the profile that they are currently projecting outwardly and my interpretation of it. And the third example I want to share is interesting because it doesn't really fit neatly into any of the configurations that I talked you through so far. And that's partly why I'm sharing it, to show that there is a continuum of practices. And it is quite possible that where you are now will fit somewhere that I've not picked out as an extreme. So the University of Cyprus doesn't have a visible centralized open research office. So if you go looking for the open research team on Google, you wouldn't find one, at least not on the English pages. But the university punches well above its weight nationally and internationally. And it does so through two distinct activities. So the first is through the library. And this is because Cyprus has been the open air national open access desk for a long time. So they have accumulated deep expertise and external recognition to that role. And they channel much of their open research guidance through that. So that's the page you can see here on the slide. So this is not a library page, it's a separate page, but delivered through their library efforts. And the second effort is something called KIOS. This is a research center that has built its own open research infrastructure and external recognition independently of the institution as a whole. And that's almost a foundational open research delivery pattern, but at the level of a research center. And this example is useful to look at because when you actually examine institutions, they're most often not pure examples of, as I was saying, any single configuration we've been through. They tend to be hybrids that emerge from history, from opportunity, and from individual leadership. And the framework is just there to help you see the components, but it doesn't mean to force institutions into boxes that they don't necessarily fit. Now, let's zoom out and look at the fact that institutions don't operate in a vacuum, as we've seen at the beginning of the presentation. There are layers around them that shape what's possible. And I'll go through this fairly quickly. But yeah, starting at the bottom, we have grassroots efforts. So these are efforts that support open research from the bottom up. So it's research communities, often early career-led, that build practice and share it. We have a few examples on this slide. So there's the Open Science Initiative and the University of Marburg in Germany. This started as an effort to connect students and early career researchers. There's the Reproducibility Initiative, which is a journal club that started at Oxford and has now spread to institutions around the world. And then we have networks like the Global Federation of Reproducibility Networks these are national level networks focused on reproducibility. In the UK, we have the UK Reproducibility Network, and there's also an Africa-wide reproducibility network. So the reach of these activities tend to be local, but some have grown well beyond individual organizations, like the Global Federation of Reproducibility Networks. And these efforts are quite important because they move faster than institutional structures and because they create demand for institutional support, which is not a bad way for things to start in an institution. And these initiatives also prove that you don't need huge resources to start making any changes. Now, above the grassroots layer, we have national initiatives, and these are powerful enablers because they shape policy and provide dedicated funding. I'll just flick through some examples here. We have the National Strategy for Open Science in Spain. In Slovenia, there's been a different strategy. There's a national degree on open science. And in France, there is a French plan for open science. It's currently the second of those. And I also want to acknowledge that these are all examples from the European context, but there are also lots of activities that are happening beyond Europe. So here on this slide, we have LibSense that has documented open science policy development across Africa, and they have lots of case studies on local implementation. Electronic information for libraries has tracked open access policy across many countries and provide links that can act as examples. And there is also a growing body of research showing the value of collaborative efforts across regions. So this is an example of an article that talks about collaboration between the European Union and Latin American countries to support open research infrastructure and data sharing. So rising now to the top level, we have the UNESCO recommendation on open science. So this is the international consensus framework, and it's what institutions, funders, and national governments increasingly point to when they want to anchor their own work into something larger. And you can see here, this is based around 4 key values: quality and integrity, collective benefit, equity and fairness, and diversity and inclusiveness, that are aligned with a set of guiding principles that you can see here on the slide. And what this table tries to do on this slide is to bridge the gap between the values, which are quite abstract, and the activities we've been talking about so far, which are very concrete. So the list is on the slide. I won't read it through row by row, but what I want to flag is the pattern. So if you look down the rows, the activities at the top, so supporting fair data, running repositories, providing open access, they are pretty well established. So most institutions have policies, teams, and budget for these, and they can audit them easily. But the activities further down, so pursuing alternative publishing models, supporting unfunded researchers, supporting grassroots initiatives, that's quite a lot harder to deliver, harder to measure, harder to put a line item in the budget for. And here, the honest observation is that most institutional open research strategies cluster their activities towards the top of this table, focusing on quality, integrity, and collective benefit to an extent. And the imagination, and arguably the most interesting work, sits further down. Now, let me close with 3 quick reflections. First, I want to say that there is no one-size-fits-all solution to embedding open research practices and culture. The configuration I described are not a ladder, as I was saying, they're just a vocabulary. So the right question for your institution isn't which one should we be, but where are we now and what is the right fit for our context in the future? The second is that the institutions that are most successful with regard to open research, so the ones that genuinely shift culture, not just compliance, have integrated open research into strategy. This is not scale alone, and this is not operational excellence alone. There is an important point about integration. And third, the fact that it is very possible to start small. There is a lot of international resources today, networks, shared infrastructure. So that means that no institution has to build this from scratch. If you take away one thing from today, I suggest it is this. Be honest with yourself about where institution actually sits, not where the strategy document says it sits, and use that as the starting point for whatever comes next. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd love to answer some questions, and I'm happy to talk about this in more detail.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for this very interesting webinar. Let's maybe we can go to the chat and see the Q&A. Yeah, there's one question from Mosamir. He is asking about for MENA region, what could be the benefits of open research, realistically, practically, and most importantly, how do you see this be implemented?
Well, I would say that the benefits are the same benefits as any other region, to be honest. The points about especially transparency, quality, and holding institution to very high expectations. Part of this is also about making sure that the work delivered by the region is as visible as possible. One of the barriers here, especially when it comes to open access, tends to be costs. So whether there is funding for article processing charges, and if not, whether diamond open access journals are sufficiently visible to enable visibility in other parts of the world. So I think there are some genuine barriers, but overall, I would say that the benefits are really the same as elsewhere. In terms of implementation, I think, as we were saying earlier, it really depends on the national context. It's not. I don't think there is an answer that you can provide for the entirety of the MENA region. And different countries will have different levels of support and funding.
Indeed, indeed. Another question coming from anonymous attendee is the era of digital transformation and AI. How can open science be effectively integrated into every stage of the scientific process to enhance transparency, collaboration, and research impacts? This is coming from Professor Ima Isam Khamis from Alexandria University. Thank you for the question.
Well, I think, in a way, I don't think AI changes much, to be honest. Well, if anything, AI raises the need for openness, because AI enables the fabrication of research, a falsification of research data. So one of the things that we've seen with AI is that it is also the growth of predatory publishing across the world. So that's all problems that AI is introduced. So if anything, I would say that the way AI is integrated into every stage of the scientific process is the same as before. But what's changed is the urgency of doing this. So I think today, because of AI, we have to be even more transparent than we would have had to be in the past. So in a way, in the past, I think open research could have been seen as a moral imperative, if you will. So as a decision, this is the right thing to do. Whereas now, increasingly, I would argue it's becoming a necessity. If we're not open, our research is exposed to too much risk of falsification. And we shouldn't forget that research is not for the sake of research. Research needs to inform policy, practice, science, progress, anything else. So I think it's ever more important to be as transparent as we can be.
Exactly, and keep it open and shareable as much as we can. So to avoid this predatory things happening a lot with the AI, and especially I would say the fabrication of the AI, not using the right tools as well. That's very common nowadays.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrea. One more question from Fatin. Do you agree that the global open science ecosystem is still strongly influenced and often dominated by commercial actors? If so, do you think this creates significant difficulties for other regions, particularly in Africa, in overcoming these challenges and in effectively adopting and implementing open science in concrete and sustainable ways?
Um, well, I think there are two sides to this. So one is I do agree that it's not just open science. The research ecosystem more broadly is strongly influenced and often dominated by commercial actors. I think yeah, nobody could argue against that. I think that that's a fact. And if anything, there's more consolidation these days happening, especially as many of these publishing giants are shifting into information brokers, not just focusing on the publishing itself. So I think that is a point I completely agree with. I don't think engaging with open science is necessarily affected by these actors. So if an institution or a country wanted to, uh, where there's a will, there's a way, goes the saying. It's the nobody is making any country or institution particularly rely on those publishers. And we're seeing a greater number of organizations today actually pulling out of the rankings, for example, that are led by for-profit organizations and unduly affecting research evaluation. So I'm not saying it is easy, but I don't think that these actors are making it particularly difficult to engage with open science in different parts of the world. I think there's a legacy of relying on these commercial actors, and so it's genuinely hard to deviate and to take a different path. But yeah, I think it's very possible.
If I may add here, Dr. Andrea, that how do you see the diamond open access approach fitting into that overall framework and supporting like the more independency for organizations and institutions when it comes to the open access?
Well, yeah, I think the Diamond Open Access model is a great way of publishing, and I think there are two common barriers that I hear about when I speak with researchers and institutions. One is financial sustainability. So who is paying for it? Because it's not, your publishing is not free. There is no way. Well, any activity is free. So there's always a question around that and around scale. But if there is an answer about that, and there could be many answers, many different ways to support it, then the second layer is recognition. And for example, many diamond presses or journals are not indexed in major bibliometric databases. And so, for example, and this actually goes back to the question about Africa we just answered. So there are some African countries or some Asian countries where evaluation is tied to indexing in Scopus, for example. And so, yeah, if a journal is not indexed there, then there's a very strong disincentive for local authors in terms of engaging with the diamond model. So, yeah, they're closely interrelated.
Exactly. One more question from Samir. Any monitoring or radar tool that scan all open research, open access activity initiatives and keep an eye on all developments?
I'm not aware of anything like that. I mean, I am personally subscribed to a number of mailing lists, things like the Scholarly Kitchen, Katina magazine. There's lots of newsletters from various learned societies. So yeah, I'm not aware of anything that does overall monitoring, I'm afraid. But yeah, lots of newsletters.
Okay, thank you. Then another one from Iftihar. What strategies can be used to promote open science, and how can institutions provide incentives to encourage academics and researchers to develop OER and publish open access?
Well, I think, okay, so I think there's lots of aspects here. So for promoting open science, I mean, these are huge questions. We could probably spend the rest of the day talking about it. But one thing I would say is that what's especially important is making sure that advice is tailored. So not thinking that the institution at the center can just put out messaging about open science or open research and expect people across the institution to get it, because I can guarantee that they won't. So there is a very important point here about doing some local tailoring and ideally having some local people embedded in departments. And they don't have to be open research people necessarily, but say the IT person embedded in the engineering department, the one embedded in the humanities department, having them translate what open research means in that context is really important. So I think using the right language and channels is essential. On the incentive side, I think it's about aligning with the commitments like DORA and Quora, but then making sure that this is also done in practice. Quite often, what I see is that an institution might align with DORA or Quora and have lots of documents on how to do responsible research assessment, but then the evaluation panel that is composed of academics and assesses somebody for their promotion will just make decisions in a traditional, so to say, way, focusing on publication only. So it's that balance between committing in principle and actually doing the thing. Convincing academics to develop open educational resources. Uh, I'm not quite sure I have an answer to that. It would be great, but I've not seen anybody being especially successful.
Okay, I'm just also aware of time. Maybe we have like many questions, around seven, five so far. So we'll take as much as we can, and maybe
Yeah, I'm happy to stay.
in your opinion, are there any specific domains or topics that the researcher should focus on today for the open research that would be acceptable in these universities internationally? This question from Hafsa.
So if I understand the question correctly, I, I think all all disciplines are starting to embrace openness, but some disciplines more than others. I see Hafsa's comment below that the field is applied
Yeah.
linguistics. I think in a field like applied linguistics, actually, it sounds like there's quite a lot of potential
Mm.
for data sharing, for example. So it sounds like a field where sharing data transparently, or if you use any code to process your data, I think there is a lot of potential. There are other fields where open research is still fairly uncommon. For example, in the humanities, there are disciplines that are mainly led by thinking. So, say philosophy, you are thinking through something, it's all in your mind. It's very hard to think about what exactly could you share transparently, for example, beyond open access publishing, I mean. So, yeah, I think any discipline in which you're producing data, code, or other digital artifacts, I would say go for it, because the change starts with you.
Brilliant. One more question from Firas. What is the role of international stakeholders in supporting open research? Um, supporting open research in emerging research environments.
So I think actually there are quite a lot of very well-meaning international organizations supporting open research in emerging research environments. I think actually some of the members of Forum itself are international organizations that are sharing their knowledge and networks and their expertise. I think quite generously, and there are a number of open research infrastructures that are making significant efforts in this direction. I know that a number of bibliometric databases or indexes of academic literature have been making significant efforts to better index information from regions that were traditionally underrepresented. So that is a very big thing that international stakeholders can do, making sure that everybody is equally represented. I think one of the biggest struggles has been multilingualism. So the fact that bibliometric indexes tend to only cover materials in English, to a lesser extent, maybe Spanish. But there is, I think, growing recognition that we need to reflect materials from all over the world so that all communities become visible. So I think that is one of the most important things that international stakeholders can do beyond engaging generously and sharing knowledge, so that everybody can develop if they want to.
Very great. So, three more questions. Our is from Tatiana. Our researchers recognize the value of open access publications. However, because funders and journals do not yet require open data, none currently deposit their data sets in open access. What benefits can libraries highlight to encourage researchers to share their data?
Well, you'll be happy or maybe unhappy to hear that there is a problem for everybody. I've been working around open data sharing for over a decade, and this is the question that people keep asking. They still ask after 10 years of working in this sector. So I don't think there's an easy answer to that, unfortunately. The best strategy that I've seen is to identify case studies, and there's actually quite a lot. If you drop me an email after this, I'll share some links with you. I have done some work on this, but it's basically the only way is to show researchers, look, this is what could happen if you share your research data. But because there is no way to predict if anybody will want to use that specific researcher's data set, and specifically in what ways. So if you share, I don't know, a data set about the weather in Nottingham, where I'm based in Nottingham, that could be used by, I don't know, a company here to model, I don't know, their performance, or how do they do deliveries in bad weather. Or it could be used by an international consortium to map weather trends across the globe. I just don't know. And so that is the hardest part, that it's hard to engage with, because you just can't tell. And so the only thing you can do realistically is show researcher what is possible in principle, and say, I think the way to look at this is almost like playing the lottery. You are never going to win unless you play. So if you don't share your data, it will never have an impact. And I'll be happy to share some examples of what this could look like.
Okay, brilliant. Following question, like again about the data sharing from Prof. Isam Khamis. In the context of global scientific challenges, how can SCI stakeholders foster international cooperation in data sharing and open science infrastructure to enhance research efficiency, innovation, and societal impacts?
Well, it's quite a lot to unpack here. I think the main point is around international cooperation in open science infrastructure. I think one of the big challenges we've seen in the past few years is that lots of open infrastructures have been started, but not all of them could be maintained. And so you see open projects that they start, they peak, and then they either plateau or decline or disappear because the funding ends. So I think one of the main things we should aim for is to identify ways to collectively fund open research infrastructures, and there are some initiatives that are doing just this. For example, Invest in Open Infrastructure is one of those that regularly campaigns for funding for open infrastructures. The other thing is that open research infrastructures are not quite on the agenda of policymakers. So while funders, well, some funders arguably care about them, not this kind of infrastructure doesn't really reach the top level of policymaking. And as a result of that, there isn't really structural funding available for it. So I think that that's really what we need, bringing this higher up in the agenda of senior policymakers.
Okay, and one last question, Andrea, before we wrap up. How can the adoption of repositories in universities be improved to promote open science?
I mean, I think there's just two sides to this in that it's I think we need to increase engagement with open research or open science. At the same time, the use of institutional repositories is not necessarily the optimal route in all cases. So the goal of institutions usually is not to maximize deposits into the institutional repository, but to make sure that the right information, whether article, data, code, or whatever else, goes in the right place. So I would say the best thing that institutions can do is to provide clear guidance and a clear path, a clear decision pathway for researchers to decide what is the most appropriate place to put their material. So, say I am a researcher in I don't know, physics. I have developed a data set on topic. The most appropriate, is there a disciplinary repository where this could best fit? Yes or no? If yes, put it there. If not, could the institutional repository be a good fit? So creating that sort of easy decision-making path for researchers is really one of the easiest interventions an institution can put into place.
Okay, excellent. It seems we have another question. Andrea, do you have still the time, or should we?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, fine. Okay, brilliant. That's quite interesting to see that interactions. Three related question from Bassam. Based on the European experience, what are the major challenges encountered and the key lessons learned? How can this European experience be best contextualized while taking our local realities into account? Given that there is no one-size-fits-all solution, what concrete first steps would you recommend for a bottom-up open science approach, particularly in context where many initiatives already exist but are not aligned with policy frameworks or with priorities of policymakers? Very interesting question. I think we need a full webinar.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. But yeah, I think on the first aspect. Let me reshare my screen for a second again. So these really are the major challenges. So the fact that quite often, well, probably too often, open research is aligned with compliance. So if there's a compliance focus, then you don't engage genuinely with open research. You just aim to tick the boxes as an institution, in terms of what do I have to do to look good, as opposed to what is the right thing to do. Then serving multiple disciplines is a big pain point for most institutions, especially small institutions that don't have enough staffing or structures to reach different disciplines. So there are lots of small institutions that have a broad range of disciplines where there is research activity. And in that case, it's generally hard to have strong provision, because you can recognize that there's a need, but you simply can't meet it. And the final point here, intellectual property. I think this is a point that applies to every institution, and this is especially hard because intellectual property varies very significantly based on the local regulation and law. So it's not one where an answer from the UK will help anybody in a different country, for example. And similarly, the main lessons learned. I won't go through them again in the interest of time, but I think it's these, and I think co-creation is perhaps, the building communities one is perhaps one of the most impactful ones. So and I think this ties into one of your second question. So what steps would I recommend regarding a bottom-up approach? So the idea that you need to build things with the community. So especially if the institution has generated a number of initiatives that appear disconnected, that is a very good sign that it's important to go back to the drawing board and engage the community, researchers who are doing active work, and ask them what do they need, what are their pain points, and as a result, what is the most appropriate structure to shape up an open research function. And that is something that I do very frequently for clients as part of my work. So I've worked for many research intensive universities in the UK where that was exactly the question. So this is what we've got. We know it's not working. Can you go and speak with researchers and help us reshape our provision in such a way that will actually meet the needs of the community? And sometimes the answer to that is a big program redesign. It could be a very large strategic initiatives. We did something a few years ago for the University of Oxford, and there is an academic article on that on the UKSG Insights. It's a publication, and that covers the framework we've been through in some detail. But in other cases, it's a very small redesign. So it's just add this bit, and it will really fix things for you. And let me see if I've answered all the bits of that question. Yeah. Oh, the point about contextualization, I think that's genuinely hard in that it really depends on each individual country's context. And actually, let me stop sharing at this point. It really depends on each individual country's context, and there's there isn't a single answer. I think a helpful way to look at this is consider the European experiences as examples, and when you look at them, see how you feel in terms of, oh, we look a bit like this and a bit like that and a bit like that. And you'll realize that probably if you look at 3 or 4 examples, you can build an initial structure for what would work for you.
Okay, brilliant. It seems like our questions still coming. Shall we take this last question, Andrea, and wrap up afterwards? This is from Dr. Sam. In the pursuit of sustainable innovation and economic development, and through the adoption of open science principles, how can partnerships between developed and developing countries strengthen the lab-to-hub transition and contribute to transforming academic research outcomes into marketable application and products, more into the research commercialization and partnerships?
Right. So, okay. So this is a very technical question. I mean, I would say that partnerships between developed and developing countries can strengthen this lab to fab transition by combining open research with shared infrastructure, shared skills, and also market access, so that academic discoveries can move more reliably into scalable products. And I think open science here helps by making publications, data, software, and any other outputs openly available and reusable, which can accelerate collaboration on one side and reduce duplication on the other side. But I think part of the reality here is that the benefits of frontier technologies, whether it's AI, Industry 4.0, green technologies, all that sort of stuff is still very unevenly distributed. And international cooperation can and should help developing countries building capacity and participating more fully in global research networks. But in practice, this is very hard because the model has historically been that high-income countries come and tell low-income countries, this is what you need to do. And the struggle that we're living through, and this is something we've experienced in a project that we did for EMBOL EBI last year, is the idea that we need a shift from that, so say global north telling the global south, this is what you need, to a genuine joint partnership approach, which is it's just genuinely hard, and it requires a culture change that I think everybody is ready for, but nobody really knows how to do in practice. So we know we need to do better, but we're struggling to make it happen.
Okay, with that said, Andrea, I would really want to thank you for this engaging and very interesting session. I would like to thank everyone who made the time and dedicated the time today to be with us. So appreciate, like, if you can take a minute before you leave, just to scan the code and share your experience with us. And that will help us, like, really to improve your experience in the future as well. And if you are interested to know more about our membership, also you can scan the code here, so you can get more information about how to become a member of Form. And this is like related to the institutional free membership to Form. The last one is our upcoming community development activities. If you are interested in such webinars and activities, here are the upcoming next 3 months webinars we will be introducing. So please feel free also to scan the codes and join us in the upcoming webinars. Thank you so much, everyone. It was like really great to be here with you today. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, Andrea, and the team behind the scene as well. And have a great afternoon.